17 morning. The drinking lasted throughout the night in the boozing ken. There were plenty of kind guests who, being flush of money, treated those that had none, and thus Tom the Cracksman and Dick Flarer and Bill Bolter were enabled to indulge to their heart's content in the adulterated liquors sold at the establishment. The cold, raw November morning was ushered in with a fine, mizzling rain. The gas lights were extinguished in the parlor, and the dawn of day fell upon countenances inflamed with debauchery and rendered hideous by dirt and dark, bristling beards. That was a busy hour for the landlord and landlady of the boozing ken. The neighbors who used the house came in one after another, male and female, to take their morning. This signified their first dram, or drink. Then was it that the all sorts was in great demand. All clothesmen, sweeps, dustmen, knackers, crimps, and women of the town crowded round the bar, imbibing the strange but potent compound. Even young boys and girls of tender age seemed as a matter of course to require the morning stimulant ere they commenced the avocations or business of the day. Matted hair, bleary eyes, grimy faces, pestiferous breaths, and hollow cheeks, combined with rags and tatters, were the characteristics of the wretches that thronged about the bar of that lowest of low drinking dens. Nothing is more revolting to the eye than the unwashed aspect of dissipation by the dingy light of the early dawn. The women had evidently jumped from their beds and huddled on their miserable attire without the slightest regard to decency in order to lose no time in obtaining their morning dram. The men appeared as if they had slept in their clothes all night, and the pieces of straw in the coarse matted hair of many of them plainly denoted of what material their beds were made. They all entered shivering, cold, depressed, and sullen. The dram instantly produced an extraordinary change in each. Artificial gaiety, a gaiety which developed itself in ribald jokes, profane oaths, and obscene talk, was diffused around. Those who could afford it indulged in a second and a third glass, and some tossed for pots of beer. The men lighted their pipes, and the place was impregnated with the narcotic fumes of the strongest and worst tobacco. Presently the policeman upon that beat lounged in, and was complimented by the landlady with a glass of her best cordial gin. He seemed well acquainted with many of the individuals there, and laughed heartily at the jokes uttered in his presence. When he was gone, the inmates of the boozing ken all declared with one accord that he was the most gentlemanly and agreeable bluebottle in the entire force. In the parlor there were several men occupied in warming beer, toasting herrings, and frying sausages. The tables were smeared over with a rag as black as a hat by a dirty slipshod drab of a girl, and with the same cloth she dusted the frame of wire-work which protected the dingy face of the huge Dutch clock. Totally regardless of her presence, the men continued their obscene and filthy discourse, and she proceeded with her work as coolly as if nothing offensive met her ears. Bill Bolter took leave of his companions at about 8 o'clock in the morning after a night of boisterous revelry, and rapidly retraced his steps homeward. Okay, so this is the morning they were going to go rob Walter Sidney, right? So we'll see if that ends up happening. Field Lane was now swarming with life. The miserable little shops were all open, and their proprietors were busy in displaying their commodities to the best advantage. In one or two low, dark shops, women were engaged in arranging herrings, stockfish, and dried haddocks. In others, coals, vegetables, and oysters were exposed for sale, and not a few were hung with old clothes as good as new. To this we may add that in the center of the great metropolis of the mightiest empire in the world, in a city possessing a police which annually costs the nation thousands of pounds, and in a country whose laws are vaunted as being adapted to reach and baffle all degree of crime, numbers of receivers of stolen goods were boldly, safely, and tranquilly exposing for sale the articles which their agents had picked up during the preceding night. There was, however, nothing in the aspect of Field Lane at all new to the eyes of Bill Bolter. When he arrived at his lodgings in Lower Union Court, he was assailed with a storm of reproaches, menaces, and curses on the part of his wife for having stayed all night at the boozing ken. At first that cruel and remorseless man trembled, actually turned pale, and trembled in the presence of the virago who thus attacked him. But at length his passion was aroused by her taunts and threats, and after bandying some horrible abuse and foul epithets with the infuriate woman, he was provoked to blows. With one stroke of his enormous fist, he felled her to the ground and then brutally kicked her as she lay almost senseless at his feet. Not a happy home. And this is where Fanny and Harry live. I worry about them now, too. Okay, I'm breaking in here for just a minute because there's a section of this that, kind of like chapter 17 that I skipped. It's one of those things where The author is highlighting the kind of experiences that especially the children had at this time as a means of drawing attention to what was happening. And so I'm just going to sum up real quick. We know that Bill came home and he was drunk and he and his wife had a fight. Well, his wife turns her anger on the children and begins beating them. And he, as a means of getting back at her, threatens to go at her again if she keeps hurting the children. That makes her mad. She smacks him. He hits her back. She ends up hitting her head on the table. And it's very obvious that she's going to die. So that is what happened in this section that I just skipped. It goes into enough detail that I don't want you to have to listen to it. So there you go, Reader's Digest version. And now we'll pop back in. The man was now alarmed and hastened to raise her up. The children were struck dumb with unknown fears and clasped each other in their little arms. The woman recovered sufficient consciousness during the 2 or 3 seconds which preceded the exhalation of her last breath to glance with her remaining eye up into her husband's face. She could not, however, utter an articulate sound, not even another moan. But no pen could depict and no words describe the deadly, the malignant, the fiendish hatred which animated her countenance as she thus met her husband's gaze. The tigress, enveloped in the folds of the boa constrictor, never darted such a glance of impotent but profound and concentrated rage upon the serpent that held it powerless in its fatal clasp. She expired with her features still distorted by that horrible expression of vindictive spite. A few moments elapsed before the man was aware that his wife was dead and that he had murdered her. He supported her mechanically, as it were, for he was dismayed and appalled by the savage aspect which her countenance had assumed. At length he perceived that she was no more, and with a horrible oath he let her head drop upon the floor. For a minute he stood and contemplated the corpse. A whirlwind was in his brain. The voices of his children aroused him from his reverie. "Father, what's the matter with Mother?" asked the boy in a timid and subdued tone. "Mother's hurt herself," said Fanny. "Poor Mother." "Look at Mother's eye, Father," added the boy. "Do look at it. I'm not sure something dreadful is the matter." After another minute's hesitation, the murderer hurried to the door. "Oh, Father, Father, don't leave us, don't go away from us," cried the little boy, bursting into an agony of tears. "Pray don't go away, Father, I think Mother's dead," added he with a glance of horror and apprehension towards the corpse. "So don't leave us, Father, and I and Fanny will go out and beg and do anything you like, only pray don't leave us, don't leave us." With profound anguish in his heart, the little fellow clung to his father's knees and proffered his prayer in a manner of the most ingenious, the most touching. With profound anguish in his heart, the little fellow clung to his father's knees and proffered his prayer in a manner the most ingenuous, the most touching. The man paused, as if he knew not what to do. His hesitation lasted but a moment. Disengaging himself from the arms of his child, he said in as kind a tone as he could assume, and that tone was kinder than he had ever used before, "Don't be foolish, boy. I shall be back directly. I am only going to fetch a doctor. I shan't be a minute." "Oh, pray don't be long, Father," returned the boy, clasping his little hands imploringly together. In another moment, the 2 children were alone with the corpse of their mother, while the murderer was rapidly descending the stairs to escape from the contemplation of that scene of horror. Okay, so that was a tough chapter. I did skip the worst parts of it. We know that Bill was supposed to go and do a robbery that morning, and then this happened, so I don't know if that's still going to happen. The mother was going to blind the daughter, which clearly is not going to happen now because the mother is dead. I'm assuming we will find out what happens to these children as things move forward, but things are getting tough. We'll see what happens tomorrow with chapter 20.